Please subscribe the channel, press the like button, and activate the notifications.
Here I write again. Here I am engraving whining nostalgia. Here I put you a point on the letter, and write you a word on the line. Here I am the simple enamored. I'm writing words of great love for you, and draw for you a space in the galaxy of literature without my literature, and expose my secret by my well, and dig a grave that could accommodates me in the cemetery of my writing and my papers. That's how the hero of our novel decided to start writing his story. My Beloved is Deaf. Novel written by the author, Mohamed Bader Al-Salem, published in 2013. Now, before we present our personal notes, we will present the story of the novel in our own way. The protagonist, Hatton, decided to write down his story and the details of his sorrow. Therefore, he sat at his apartment on a table full of paper, tempted by its whiteness, to cast his grief darkness over it, wishing that he would forget and that God would save him from his sadness that destroying him. It all started when the father decided to return to Riyadh after 5 years of commuting between Saudi cities because of his work. Hatton and his sisters were glad that they would return to their grandmother's house and to embrace of relatives. He did not realize that when he packed his bags he was going to the misfortunes of love. The first love encounter was on the doorstep of the grandmother's house, where the family lived. Knocked on the door, knocked on the heartbeat heavily. An angel appeared, bearing a bouquet of flowers. An angel descended from the sky from which only her eyes appeared. Hatton stood shocked by her beauty, got confused of her silence, interrupted by the voice of his mother welcoming her, and asked him to went up to the upper floors. His sister Yumana told him that she is his deaf cousin, Amin. Hatton recalls their childhood together, playing together in the grandmother's house yard, the relatives harassing, and her doll, that she never left. He wondered if she didn't recognize him as he didn't recognize her, and when she left, he went down to the hall, sat beside his grandmother, and wanted to know more from her about Anin. So, he claimed stupidity, asked her about the guest. His grandmother told him that she is his cousin Anin, and she explained to him that she is sent for her, as she is now 26 years old, but God's destiny made her deaf, so she did not marry till now, despite being the most beautiful woman in Riyadh. The same day, he left with Khaled, his childhood friend, a friendship that did not end despite leaving Riyadh with his family. Khaled knows many women, his phone is full of their names, which prompted Hatton to ask for his advice, so he asked him, is it possible for him to love a deaf girl? Khaled firmly refused, arguing that he did not want to oppress himself. Hatton got angry. What answer is this? He has vowed to himself since he met Anin to be a supporter to her cause, as she is not an incomplete person. Days have passed since the first meeting. Hatton thinks only of Anin, surprised of himself, even leaving home and meeting his friends couldn't save him from thinking of her. One day, and while playing cards, his mobile rang. His mother asked him to get back home, as she wanted him to deliver Anin to her home. Suddenly, he throws all the papers away of his hands, and ran outside, drive the car bypassing red traffic lights, not sure how he got to his grandmother's house. He took a breath, adjusted his appearance and clothes and waited. Few minutes later Anin got out like the lightning moon, like an angel. She got in the car and they launched. He felt he was flying. He did not want to reach their destination, he wanted to be lost forever. He embezzled many and many looks at the little magic mirror. He didn't want to let her go, he wanted to let her hear his heartbeat, to tell her that he loved her from the first moment, but she rushed into the house. He went back to his house, entered his room directly, and surrendered to sleep hoping to see her eyes in his dreams. He slept with a smile and woke up with a smile. Since that meeting, Anin has become his joy, smile, dream and reality. He searched for ways to contact her, to tell her that he has passed the stage of admiration and felt of love with her, and that he wants her and wants her to hear his poems. He wanted to see her face, see the redness of her cheeks, see her laugh, and the whiteness of her teeth. On the 10th night after that meeting, while Hatton was busy writing his master's thesis, he received a call from King Faisal Specialist Hospital. The doctor requested his presence directly and refused to inform him who is the injured, but he knew. He put on his clothes and ran down. In the hall, his mother saw fear in his eyes and his hands trembling. She ran behind him, calling for him, but he did not stop. He got in his car and drove off, realizing that he would return crying at an irreplaceable man, and that his heart would be torn on a father who would not be able, no matter how old he'd become, to live without him. The road to the hospital took 35 minutes, hundreds of supplications, more than 70 calls to his father's closed phone, and several curses, and when he arrived he was asked to sit in the waiting room. He felt that the gray hair started invading him, as his feet were shaking, his heart was beating hard, and his face was covered with wrinkles of anxiety. The doctor came to deliver the sad news. As his father was ran over and did not survive. The doctor killed him with his words. He collapsed on the ground, and no chairs were able to bear the weight of his tears and sorrow. All he thought about was how to tell his mother that her husband died, and that he left him a cold body lying in the fridge. How would he tell his grandmother that her little boy passed away? What would he tell his sisters? That their father died, without a farewell word, without a kiss on the forehead, and how he would be able to hold him with his hands and lay him in the ground. After his crying became without tears, he called Caled. He came quickly and mourned him with a lot of words, delivered him to his house, told him that he is now the man of the house and asked him to be strong. But when he entered the house and found his mother crying, perhaps her heartfelt separation, Hatton collapsed at her feet. With words like a sword tore her heart, "My father is gone, oh mother, he is gone." Hatton spent days avoiding seeing his mother, seeing sadness in her eyes, and seeing her crying, when she sees his father's portraits on his face and hears his father's voice through his voice. But he realized that his life has now changed, so he abandoned his papers for the master's degree. He holds his green file, knocked all the doors of the ministries and institutions, but the days are running and the job opportunities do not come, and he needs the job. He is now responsible for 3 people. His mother helped him to find a job. She contacted her older brother who owns one of the major companies, despite he always rejected the idea of mediate, but he has no choice. Now is not the time for principles. The next day, he swallowed his pride and went to his uncle's company. He entered his office, which located on the 13th floor. His uncle greeted him with hurtful words. He talked about his father and his rejection to establish a company with him, and mocked of his convincing of the simple work. Hatton wanted to scream, to empty his anger upon him, but he kept silent because he needed the job. His uncle ended his chain of criticisms, and told him that he could start his work the next day. Hatton left the company depressed. His mother welcomed him at home, informed her that he got the job. His mother felt his sadness and realized that her brother took advantage of their need to insult her husband. She embraced him and asked him to be patient for the sake of his sisters. Hatton smiled artificially and promised that he would never abandon them. He went up to his room and lay on the bed, wondering what the future hid for him. And then his phone rang for receiving a message congratulating him from an unknown number. He didn't even bother himself reading it, thinking that it's from one of his relatives, so he ignores it, left his phone, and surrendered to sleep. He woke up in the evening, went down to the hall. His grandmother congratulates him for the job, and blamed him for not performing the prayer on time. He smiled, then she kissed his forehead. He felt that she granted him of her light and warm. Then she whispered in his ear that his cousin Eileen had took his phone number to text him. He remembered the message he received and ignored. He searched his phone among letters till he finds it. "Congratulations, my brother, for the job. I was happy to hear this news. May God always grant you success." But he wanted to make sure that this message from Eileen. So he pretends calmness and asked Eileen number from his grandmother to thank her. She gave him her small notebook which is full of numbers to check. He is now sure it's from Amin. He read her simple message many times, imagining her face that he had not seen, blaming her for her cruelty. How did the message include the word of, my brother, as he loved her madly? Didn't she hear his heartbeat? Didn't she realize his happiness to see her? Hatton spent hours looking for proper words to respond to her message. And at the end he sent a sad message, and prayed to God that she feels sad for him and to consolate him. He thanked her for the message and told her that he was not happy with the job, it looked like charity. The time passed midnight and he's still watching his phone. Despair leaked inside him. Is everything finished before it starts? He prayed to God with all his might to give him happiness and to relieve his grief. The answer came quickly, in the shape of incoming message from Amin, asking about the reasons of his unhappiness. He was pleased, as his plan succeeded. He responded with a sudden speed, that he did not want to disturb her. Amin replied that she wants to know the reasons for his grief, as he had a wonderful job opportunity. He texts her that he knows that he did not get it for his efficiency, but rather as an aid from a relative who hates his father and does not like to see him. She replied to him by asking him to look at life with another perspective. To be happy with the opportunity that will give him financial comfort. And perhaps give him opportunity to improve his relationship with his uncle, and she asked him not to give up. Then they continued to correspond. The first lovebirds message was sent by Hatton with one phrase, I love you. Amin replied, uncertainty hesitant, if the message was delivered to her by mistake. Hatton assured her that he meant it, as he feels that he had to be direct and straight and confess his love. A silence reigned on the phone for hours. Hatton didn't want to stop, so he sent his second, third, fourth, and fifth message, and in every message, he affirmed his love. He begged her not to refuse him, and not be afraid of love. At the end Amin sent asking about the reason for his love. He explained to her in his next message, that it was love from the first moment as her eyes captured him. Amin responded firmly, she reminds him that she is deaf and not like any other girl. He sent her that he loves her and that she is purer than all women. And on that night, they continued chatting for hours. And eventually they went out of the shell of friendship to the space of love. After that, they continued to communicate, and despite the repetition of the word my lover, with every message, but it never became an ordinary word. One day, Hatton received a message from Amin wishing him a happy birthday, and shaken him by the word my lover. He replied in boldness asking for his gift, as he wanted a memento to keep for years, and to boast in front of their children in the future. She asked him to be patient as she didn't forget his gift. Hatton waited till one day, he receives a message from her asking him to meet her in the outside laundry room carefully and in an elegant look, to receive his gift. He wore his clothes and get out without being seen by the house residents. He quickly entered the laundry room, to find Amin standing in front of him showing her black hair, and only 4 steps separate them. The silence ruled for moments, where each one was only staring to the other. Amin approached him and distance shrinked to breaths. Hatton hugged her without hesitation, touched her hair and face. He was dazzled by her beauty, as she is like the bright moon. Amin also touched his face, hair, and beard. Hatton surrendered to his whispering heart and kissed her. And he did not want to get away, but her phone rang and cut that moments of love. So Amin wore her cloak, and covered her face, and left, leaving him drunk with love smiling. After that meeting, Hatton decided to learn the sign language, because he wanted to understand her, when she got angry, sad, or love, by her hands language and when he informed her. She was very pleased of his desire to indulge her world, to change for her. So, he asked her to speak through Skype and to be his teacher. They both prepared, dressed their most beautiful clothes, sat in front of the computer screen. Hatton frozen when a name picture showed on the screen. He never and will never get used to her beauty. They didn't spoke a word. She was ashamed of his stare, but she was very eager to teach him, so she started with the first lesson. Hatton followed each and every move. He didn't neglect any of her hands' movements. Due to their meetings in the virtual world for days, their relationship strengthened. Hatton plans to knock on her house door and ask her for marriage, as only by thinking that she would be his wife, his heart fills with happiness. Hatton went to his mother and told her of his desire to marry. She started talking to him about her friend's daughter and described her beauty. Hatton interrupted her that he loved his cousin, Amin. His mother screamed, angry, reprehensible of his desire to marry a deaf girl. All Hatton's efforts to calm her down was failed, whose refusal was categorically, and that she will not never allow him to marry her. He got mad of his mother, hated that she deprived him of his happiness without convincing reason, and he hated her racism. Hatton could not tell Amin about his mother's decision. He started lying to her, talking about wedding and children, but every time Amin dreamed of their future together and calling him my lover, his depression increased. He got ashamed of himself for making promises he won't fulfill. He reduced his messages to her, neglected her and neglected her contacts. Amin blamed him as she didn't know the reason for his desertion. He became afflicted insomnia, and got afflicted by grief, because he realized that he had become a criminal with love, as he loves her and wants her, but he is an Eastern man who does not marry without the consent of his mother and the blessings of his clan. He wished that he could kidnap her and flee. He wished that he abandoned the paradise under the feet of his mother. One day after work, Hatton took his grandmother to the hospital, accompanied by Amin, and every time their eyes met in the mirror, she looked away. Her cold looks killed him, but he knows that what happened is his fault as he is the one whom neglected her. At the hospital, a Lebanese doctor examined the grandmother, during which he exchanged reproach and shame looks with Amin. And at the end of the examination, the doctor assured them, and asked Hatton to speak to him in private. She wrote some prescription for their grandmother and warned him of letting her make any effort. She also gave him her phone number and asked him to call her to check on the granny condition. Hatton, surprised of her boldness, thanked her and left. Days later, Hatton received an email from Amin. She started with the word, "I hate you," admonishing him that he had entered her into the world of love, deserted her with its swirl and left her prisoner of sorrow. Her message extended to pages. Hatton was ashamed of every word he read, but he decided to respond to it, as this is the least she deserves. He told her that he really wished her to hate him and wished he could hate her too. But he loved her to the extent of worship, seeing her in everything he touched, waking up every night dreaming of her sleeping beside him, and asked her to forgive his fear and cowardice. Later, when Hatton met Khaled, he told him about the doctor. Khaled encouraged him to communicate with her, and Hatton called her asking her to meet. Hatton justified her daring, for coming from a country where men and women friendship are not a crime. They met for dinner. She told him that her name is Diala and she worked as a doctor specialized in heart diseases, and that she loves her work but she hated her life that she lives alone. She speaks about love. Hatton explained to her that he is in love with a girl, that he will never be married. Diala and Hatton's relationship developed. Diala taught him to forget his love for Amin. She gave him her body without asking anything in return. She told him her story, as she was born in the Lebanese countryside in a very poor family, and since her childhood she revolted against the life of poverty. She threatened many times to escape from the house, and at her 18 she left, leaving behind a letter telling her family that she loves them but hates her life. Her parents searched for her everywhere, asked all her schoolmates, published ads at the newspaper but with no use. She told him that her friend Selma, who is 4 years older than her, introduced her to a rich man who offered her a deal to marry her and to give her money, in exchange for giving her body. Of course, Salma was known by tempting the poor girls with money to satisfy the rich men in exchange for a bundle of money. Diala mentioned that she refused at the beginning, but Salma insisting and her reality which become poorer, pushed her to find her happiness and abandoning her family. So she traveled with her husband who is 30 years older than her. Her husband fulfilled his promise, so she lived a life that she had never dreamed of. But she realized that nothing combined her with her husband except his spending on her lavishly, and marital cohabitation which he determined its dates. And that she realized that she was more like a lover than a wife. And she knew that there is no return, so she devoted her free time to study, and she got the medicine certificate. Also, she used his money to travel all over the world. With the development of Hatton and Diala relationship, they decided to flee to Beirut. And they lived in a small apartment overlooking the sea. They spent a week together, but in the end the fires of craving extinguished. What started quickly ended quickly. Hatton packed his bag and left without even saying a goodbye. And when he returned home, he fabricated lies that justified his travel to Beirut. And ascended to his room and wrote a letter to Anine for which he apologized. And asked her to forgive him, telling her that he would love her till the last moments of his life. The next day, his grandmother informed him that Anine will marry. Hatton froze. He had a departure paralysis. Every memory of Anine stormed inside him. Anine chose her way to revenge. She chose an end that not include a one house joining them. An end that made Hatton wishes he had been created as an inanimate, with no feelings. On the wedding night, the witnesses signed the decision if Hatton lost, and he stood up watching from a distance, watching her in her white dress, shining beside her deaf husband as well. 4 years have passed since that wedding night. Anine's happiness was completed with 2 girls, who filled her house with their sweet voice. But Hatton is still standing on the rubble, unable to forget. His mother's pleas for getting married and bring her grandchildren didn't help. Kale's advices that she did not deserve his love and to give up the past and forget her, did not help as well. But he is unable, as the nightmares exhausted his body and sadness exhausted his soul, and he realizes that everything happened was his mistake. So he avoids people, and avoid talking, as if he atonement for all years of Anine's silence. Hatton finished writing his story. He didn't care who will read it, but he wished that Anine would not read, as he didn't want her to read about his grief, he didn't want her to get sad, because the tears she shed for him still haunt him. And before he collected his papers, Diala entered his apartment apologizing for the delay. This is how the novel ended. I hope we summarized it in a good way, and now please allow us to present our personal opinion. The story of the novel may seem simple, as it talks about falling in love and indulging in it, but love in the narration was not normal for a society that refuses to love a deaf woman. So it was sentenced to death before even sees the light. The novel raised some social issues, such as Diala fleeing from her home to escape poverty and how some people exploiting the needs of young girls to satisfy their desires. Also, the novel raised the issue of derogation in the society from the person who suffers from a birth defect and killing his dreams, as they judge him and decided for him that they deserve only to marry someone similar to them. In our personal opinion, the biggest case presented by the novel is options. Hatton's choice to give up his studies to care for his family. His choice to withdraw Anine with him for the maze of love, and to give up later because of his fear of standing up to his mother and his community. And his choice to be involved in his relationship with Diala, in the hope that he will forget his love. His mother's choice to see Anine as a deficient human being. Her choice also to assassinate their love and to deprive her child of happiness. Anine's choice to forget her love for Hatton and to move forward in her life by marry a man whom the society accepting for her. And ultimately, the choice of Hatton to remain stuck in the memory of his love for Anine, unable to escape from the past. Despite the story is short, but the writer was able to present it in a wonderful way, especially with the ability to harness the Arabic language to express feelings in a way that makes you cry with it sometimes and smile sometimes.
Thanks for your generous watching. If you like the video, please subscribe the channel, press the like button, and activate the notifications.